A very good afternoon to all of you. I welcome you all to session number 7 of our Saturday interview series. And today's conversation is going to be between Murugaraj Shanmugam and Mr. Yatindra Joshi. Mr. Joshi happens to be the only Indian editor among 28 editors worldwide who have second level diplomat status certification from the Board of
Vivek, I briefly lost. Have you completed the introduction?
He has muted himself.
All right. So good evening then. I think it's you and me now.
Right. Okay.
And thank you for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to see you speak among the editors. I remember very well 2 years ago. I keep going back to our conference, the Chennai conference, because that's where I physically met many of you. For that matter, Surit, you, Bushra, and many other people I met. So, in fact, when I saw the preparations for that Editors Conclave, so this Bell certification, and then you being mentioned as one of the, especially one from India who has that diploma. So from then on, there have been a lot of discussions in our groups, right? ICF groups about certification, membership, and other things. I wanted to know from you, what does it mean to be a CAC certified editor? And we will go to the diplomat status next.
Okay. Well, right now from this year, it's much simpler examination because now you can take it online. Until now, the first level, that is which allows you to put ELS editor in life sciences. It used to be an invigilated examination. For many years, in fact, you had to take it only in the US. And after a while, they opened up some centers outside US. Typically, they would club it with similar conferences overseas, European Association of Science Editors and so on. But even then, that's quite a lot to just attend that examination. But I think since 2006 or 2008, then Cactus took the lead and they have been holding these examinations in Mumbai. So that's how it's, and that's a straightforward examination, although it is conducted by BELS, that is the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences. It doesn't presuppose any special knowledge of biology. It is essentially science editing, so basic style.
Is it me just
research related manuscripts. So that's the certification about. So essentially it's multiple choice objective questions. And now you can take it online even.
So talking about that, when did you take this certification for the first time?
I think, I took it in 2008. In fact, that was the first time it was being held in Mumbai.
Mumbai, okay.
Yeah, and I remember Cactus was involved in it, and so I was associated with Cactus, and I'm associated even now. So they allowed all of us to appear for this examination. And the funny thing was, because they also asked me to conduct some training programs for Cactus editors to prepare them for this examination.
Oh, okay.
And I was also taking that examination, so I was really quite nervous because it shouldn't so happen that I don't pass it and many others do, but it did. Luckily, that didn't happen. And it's a fairly straightforward examination. So more and more people should take it if you think that it's going to be of some benefit, because this is something I always find a little disconcerting. After we are offering a service, and your customer is not generally terribly interested in any formal qualifications that they have. They are mostly concerned with how well you do the job, how cheaply you do it, and how quickly you do it. So beyond that, at least I find the customers, that is the authors, are not really unduly concerned. Whereas other copy editors or people who might be hiring you, maybe it will weigh with them that you have some kind of accreditation. But with authors, I really don't think it carries a great deal of weight.
I think I am trying to relate this point with another frequent discussion that our group normally has. It's about the pricing. Okay.
Okay.
Whenever we talk about pricing and try to compare ourselves with European editors or American editors, one thing that I wanted to mention is these accreditation and beyond the experience that we have from some of the companies in India. So I think that helps us set us apart from the rest of the editors and showing to the world, especially when an author is trying to entrust us with their editing work. They need to see some proof that we are worthy of it.
Yes, it's quite true. In fact, I remember reading about this. There was one Vani Shankar, I think. I don't recollect the name. And there was some small news item about this, that she took this examination, accreditation, and she was in the US then, and she bid for some newsletter of some New York corporation or some such thing related to water. So she made a bid to publish their newsletter, and on the strength of this accreditation, she was able to win that bid. Yeah. So yes, it could come in handy.
It's like a winning horse, using its nose to.
yeah, sure, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And as I was browsing the Bell site about these editors in India, other things, I saw a lot of people from Cactus.
Yes, yeah.
History behind why there are a lot of editors on Bells. Okay. So what does it mean to be on diplomat status?
Well, as I said, one is it has relative value. In fact, I will correct Vivek. Now there are 30 editors, not 28. 2 have been added. But I find that one of the comments my friend made more telling when I told him that I have aced this examination and I am the only one from India. So he said, "Well, that makes you one in more than 1 billion. Even genetic disorders are not so rare." So, and as I said, apart from this kind of star value, I really don't think I have benefited a great deal by being a diplomat editor. Okay. My motivation was I simply wanted to find out how well I compare with other editors, because copy editing is essentially a solitary business. You and your manuscript, well, sometimes your author. So it was simply a matter of curiosity that how well I edit. Do I edit comparable to? I mean, is there any objective standard? So that is how it got me thinking. And since Cactus has already paid for my first level examination, because that's a requirement, so then it get me at least a foot in the door. And it is a tough examination. In fact, I failed the first time, but they gave some good feedback. And in fact, they said that, yes, it is by no means uncommon. People rarely succeed in their first attempt, but we encourage you to try the second time. And second time, it worked. Even then, it didn't work quite smoothly, because they said you are falling short of some half a mark or something like that. But you can also appeal. So I appealed, saying that one of the items in the feedback you have given, that the way I had edited tables, that doesn't really show any required proficiency. So I told them, see, partly it's a matter of the tables that you get to edit, because the portfolio is of samples that you have edited. So I said, it just so happens that the tables that I got in the manuscript that I edited really didn't require so much editing in terms of tables. But since you have specifically mentioned tables, I can tell you that I have contributed to the chapter on tables in European Association of Science Editors Handbook. So that somehow must have convinced them. That was one point. The other point, they said that your interaction with authors doesn't really do you credit or some such thing. So I said again in the portfolio, there was no scope to write anything about this, but I can show you emails I have received from authors saying that it has been a pleasure to work with you. It simply didn't occur to me that I would require some kind of, I would require to produce some evidence to that effect, but here it is. So then based on these 2 points, they considered my appeal and I cleared it.
Okay. Now, as you talked about, one of the points you did not go through is tables. I was surprised because, as you rightly pointed out, you wrote a chapter on tables.
Yeah, and it has been a particular interest of mine. I mean, it's something that I enjoy doing, crafting tables. So it just so happens that this was the case, but they were convinced, so I was in.
So this number also possibly changing because 2 years ago it was around 35 or so. Now 20.
No, it was 28 and now it is 30.
30. Okay.
Yeah, but the examination is also changing. For instance, when I appeared, and until last year, the requirement was that you submit a portfolio of your work, about 30 or 40 pages, edited pages, and you had to write essays on 2 topics. So you were given a list of topics, about 25, 30 odd topics, all related to editing. Okay. And you could write a short essay about 500 words on any 2 of the topics. Okay. But now they have done away with that requirement. Now it's no longer, you just submit your portfolio and that's the examination. Yeah.
So talking about the first level, you said it is not much difficult or rather straightforward examination.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But why is this D level or the diplomate level, there are only 30 people? Why is it not high? Is it deliberately kept at that level?
One is that, see, the way it runs, see, you have, your portfolio is assessed by 3 independent examiners. And the qualifying marks, I think, are 85. So out of each of these 3 examiners has to give you more than 85 marks out of 100. So that, of course, is not very easy. And what they're really looking for is how well you are able to change what the author has, where the author has been either vague or dilatory, whether you are able to put that into better language. That is the primary skill that they're looking for in diplomate level.
Okay.
So that's probably makes it difficult. That it's not simply mechanics of style and references and so on, whether it's an M dash and N dash. No, that's the preliminary level. That's fine. But here, that is the key skill they are looking for. That whether you are able to understand what the author has written and where needed, are you able to put it in better terms and so on. So I mean, that's my guess. Maybe that's what makes it difficult.
Okay. What could be your recommendations for training to take this examination?
For diplomate level, I would say it is...
for the first level. Many of us are at the first level.
So, in fact, for the first level, I would say you really don't require any special training. And when you register for the examination, they also give you a study guide with sample questions and so on. So that itself, if you study that carefully, and if you have been editing, if you have an eye for detail, then I would say that's more than enough.
Okay.
You should be able to clear that.
So what is the odds of 5+ years of experience, an editor with 5+ years?
Oh, I'm sure the odds are very high that that editor will clear the first level examination. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. Great.
And the sample questions will really give you a much better idea that what sort of questions are asked. It's essentially a multiple choice because that's a qualifying examination. In the sense, they simply want to assess whether you have reached a certain level of competency. It doesn't have to be exceptional competency, but you should know the basics.
Okay. So I think we are coming up with a session, if I'm right, about various certifications and preparations and other things. So we'll have much more or in detail discussion on.
Oh yes, sure. Yeah.
So I also wanted to know from you, because you have been also a trainer. You were a researcher and then a scientist and then editor and trainer and editor nowadays. So,
right. Yes.
You are training portfolio reads that, about communicating in style that you created in 20 years
Oh, yeah. It was
page
2003. Yes.
2003.
Mm.
So in one of our last calls, you mentioned that the second edition is in the pipeline. So what?
Well, it has not really moved beyond one chapter, but yes. So I can technically say it is in the pipeline. Yes.
Okay. So what changes are expected in this?
I would say changes there. I'm not really think of any major changes. The major changes would be in resources, because that is something I had specifically emphasized in communicating in style. That it's simply not my word, but I've made it a point. In fact, if you have had a look at the book, you'll say every 50%, because almost every other left-hand page is an example from some other source. So I'm drawing on far wider range of sources and more up-to-date sources. That is one difference. The other difference is communicating in style assume that your first draft is ready. So it is essentially to how to polish your draft. It never said anything about how you arrive at the first draft in the first place.
Okay.
So I'm proposing to add 2 chapters on that. That is, how do you start writing, how do you keep writing, and how do you reach the first draft. So that is the major change I mentioned.
Do you also have something to some tips for writer's block? Many people have a lot of ideas, and putting the first word on the paper is the most difficult.
Yeah. Oh, far more qualified people than me have written about this. And I would say what is a common thread in almost all of them is routine. Somerset Maugham, I'm a big fan of Somerset Maugham, and he was a very prolific author, but his routine never changed. That the morning, first thing he would do, get up and start writing, and well until lunchtime he would write, and this was his day in and day out. He did that. And many other writers I have read their interviews, they all say the same thing, that it is a matter of habit. You must force yourself to sit down and put words on paper, and you don't have to wait for inspiration. It becomes a habit. So once it becomes a habit, then your brain will adapt to that, and you will gradually start writing about this. The other practical tip I would mention is, before you start writing about a topic that you have in mind, it will help if you discuss that topic verbally, talk about it to someone or the other. So that will sort of prime you. So once you start writing, words will come to you faster if it has already been primed by a prior conversation.
So talking about that, and about your contribution to other parts of training, that we talked about, your chapter on designing tables for the Science Editor's Handbook, or your contribution to IGNOU's course on publishing, with the focus on copy editing chapter. From a trainer's perspective,
in fact, I would say that copy editing is one of those skills that is particularly amenable to training, and particularly self-training. It's not as though you are learning how to operate a lathe or any laboratory research or sophisticated instrumentation where you require hands-on training and supervision and so on. Copy editing is a craft that you could very well learn, and the sources are so many. You have such a rich source. You take this forum itself, many people have shared their knowledge. So it is something that is amenable to training. And in fact, recently I published a paper in an article in Current Science. I titled it Helping Scientists Write, Publish and Present. That is based on my 15 odd years of experience in training scientists. So I make this point there that only if you have some sessions to tell you what copy editing is all about, there you would require some formal instruction. But once you have that, you are on your own, and you can keep improving your skills simply by making use of the abundant resources that you have. So what you really need is the drive to learn. I mean, unless you have that commitment. Once you have that commitment, there are so many ways in which you can better yourself as a trainer. So training, my perspective is not so much. See, after all, if I offer to train copy editors, my pool of participants is going to be limited, because after all, there are not too many copy editors. But if I extend my training and aim at authors, then I have much larger pool. And that is a real need there, because Indian scientists, because my experience has almost exclusively been academic and scientific community. And we have really a large pool of scientists, and who would be very happy for someone to train them in this publishing research papers.
I wanted to share an experience that I had recently. I was invited by Satyabama University, a deemed to be university in Chennai. So there's a paper called Research Methodology, okay, that every researcher has to pass in the initial days of their research. One of the chapters is about publishing ethics. So through a professor friend of mine, I was introduced to the dean of this research, and then I was asked to take the session on publishing ethics. So it was around 10 or 12 hours of training on various aspects of right from plagiarism to understanding metrics, differentiating between the predator journals and the peer-reviewed journals. So on all of these things, I was surprised to see that there were around 60 participants through this entire 12-hour session on various days. And most of them did not know that there is a profession called copy editing, and there are people who can help with their writing and editing process.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was of the impression that because we receive a lot of work from authors in the last 15 years, we have been working with authors. In the initial days of their research career, they find this to be a completely unknown territory. It was a real surprise for me. So I think training them at the initial stage itself would be probably be.
Yeah, absolutely. You are totally right. I mean, because there is very little awareness. That is one. The other key thing is, the way how this funding works. Now, if I am a researcher, I have a project which is sanctioned, or if I am working for a research institute. So if I travel, that amount is reimbursed. If I engage a field assistant, if I buy equipment, consumables, that amount is reimbursed. If I pay a draftsman to prepare charts for me, that amount is reimbursed. But if I pay an editor, it is not reimbursed. Because there is simply no accounting head for that. It is as trivial as that. If you somehow get this into the research administrator's head that this is a legitimate expense and simply create a head of account, our job would be much easier.
Much easier.
Yeah.
Last week, one of the researchers from a premier institute in Tamil Nadu, and he asked me to edit a 4,000 word article.
Okay.
So I charged him to Indian standards, probably high, but I charged him one rupee per word. Okay. So there was a 10-minute negotiation for this.
Yes.
So finally he said, sir, I have to pay this out of my own pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
He is receiving grants, but he said, I have to pay this out of my pocket for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I don't know what to say, because it's a 4,000 word article. If I'm going to negotiate and reduce the price, I don't know what to say. But as you rightly said, yes, this is not recognized probably as a separate.
It's a legitimate expense. It is as simple as that.
And you also talked about, if at all there is a possibility to train copy editors, even though it's a small pool, considering the awareness that we have created in the last 6 months or so, and considering the awareness that Dr. Venkat created in the last 1 year,
yes, yeah,
training and other things, I'm sure there is a pool of editors interested to learn editing from you. That is also another point that I wanted to talk to you, because I know stories about you being picky about a particular customer. I heard that you turned down a customer because you had to walk down to your nearest post office 2-3 miles away. So you wanted to avoid that. You avoided the client altogether.
Well, partly true, but it's a funny thing. Now, this happened to be a management institute, and I asked them, you are a management institute, and you are not able to handle this e-receipt. I mean, how do you become managers? But I'm glad that then I made my point and I said, I'm sorry, because for me, it involves walking down and that is claiming my time. And in that time, I can earn money. Why would I do this? But I'm glad that they saw this sense of that and then changed their procedures.
Wow. That part of the story I didn't know.
Yeah. So,
Okay, so that also made me think, okay, how you would normally be editing. So it's like a serious business. Like you also said sometime back that it's a solitary business, right? There is no.
yeah, it is.
Sometimes I listen to music. Most of the times it is me and the manuscript in front of me.
No, I can't do that. I can't multitask that. I listen to music and as a background and copy it. No, it is just manuscript and I'm working on it. I can't really handle distractions in that.
No, I consider music to be a companion. Again, perspectives.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's also your how you function, what is comfortable to you. But at the same time, in fact, I should mention this point that copywriting is a solitary business, yes, but it is also a sedentary business, and that is something we really need to be concerned about. That we need to exercise. Physical exercise is essential.
Essential, yeah.
And you mentioned this because you have now all these activity trackers, and so I have invested in one, and after 1 hour it beeps saying that you have not moved for 1 hour. So that's a signal for me to get up from my chair and do something. I spend some time with my plants. I have a small balcony garden. Whatever, I spend some 5-10 minutes, and then I come back to my copy editing. But it is important that as copy editors we will, and this is not, I don't know whether it's an appropriate forum to mention this, but it is really important that as copy editors, because our business is totally sedentary, we really need to make physical exercise a part of our daily routine.
In fact, I can work in short spells. I cannot, even if I work 6 or 7 hours continuously, I cannot work without any break. So every 30-40 minutes, my biological clock tells me to do that.
I mean, that's a good practice. Yeah, surely.
So, not much of exercise, I would say, but staying away from the chair and moving away from the screen.
Yes, that's important. Yes.
So somebody else also asked, what was the workplace like in TERI in those days?
Oh, TERI was a tremendous learning experience. Absolutely. I mean, because when I joined, it was a very small unit. There were just 3 of us. And a thing different in TERI was that you had to take care of everything from manuscript to printed copies. So it's not as though you merely copy it and pass it on to somebody else and they will take care of printing and so on. No, it was like a turnkey job. If you have given a book to edit, so you will copy edit it, then you will see to it that it is printed. You will negotiate with the printer. You will arrange for paper. You will arrange for any trial, cover design, and so on. Until the printed copies are delivered, it was your responsibility. So that was a great learning experience, because this is something I find that we as copy editors need to know. Well, technology changes, so I'm not now. It doesn't really matter whether you have never stepped into a printing press; it's no longer really required. But in that case, you need to know something about HTML coding or website or how this is, all whatever that's going to affect the final product. And you need to know that. And again, for people who are entering scientific editing, I will say this because again, they have no clue what happens before the manuscripts come to their desk and what happens to it after. And it is important to know that, because that's your work. And unless you familiarize yourself with the whole scientific process, that's I would say a vital part of your training, and that's missing. Even earlier in the forum, I made this point that you can always even volunteer, because there are so many research institutes and they need copy editors. And I'm sure you will be only welcome if you say that I will I'm a copy editor, and I would like to know something about research. So I would spend time with you. I will edit one or two manuscripts, and in return, you get a desk space and you talk to scientists and you get to know how the game is played.
Mm.
I suggested this to Cactus, in fact, and I was able to arrange for an internship with NCL in Pune,
Mhm.
and it really worked well. So this is important, that you need to know, if especially if you are going to be a copy editor of scientific and technical manuscripts, that you need to know your customers, what drives them,
Mm.
and so on. See, this person who agreed to you, because although he negotiated, but he agreed to pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for them, a research paper, lot more is at stake.
Mm.
Because for a scientist to get a paper published, especially in a good journal, it means a lot to their careers. So the stakes are high.
Right.
That's what they are willing to pay.
Mm.
Unlike publishers, for them, the stakes are not very high. So
It's
I would
pure-
say, if it comes to choosing customers, we will be better off choosing customers for whom the stakes are high in publishing.
Yeah. I think that's a good perspective, because for publisher it's more of another part of
Yeah.
business, right? They
Absolutely.
don't have any emotional attachment to the product.
Yeah. And they will be looking for cutting costs, and you are part of the cost. So
And I think it's also unfortunate that the entire editing process is compartmentalized nowadays, because
yes, yeah.
companies are
You see,
working-
because I would say that copy editor is the one person, even more than author, who is so thoroughly familiar with every the manuscript. So if you want to capitalize on that familiarity, and then if you put in add-on services like, as I said, formatting, designing, that will help you, because you are so intimately conversant with the manuscript that you would be able to do a much better job of designing. In fact, there are book designers, but by and large, I have seen, at least in India, the designers are really not concerned about the contents. In fact, the only one person I have come across so far, Sujata Kesavan, she said that, first I have to look at the book. I need to see the book. I need to get a flavor of the book. Only then I can design. But no other designer, because when I was in Terry, you to at least the cover design we will outsource. Internal design was ours, but cover design it was outsourced. And virtually no designer ever express any interest in looking at the contents of the book. They just tell me the title, tell me the print size, and I will design. But we never gave job to such a designer.
So when did this designing became part of you? Because you are also known among our circles more for the taste for typeset and formatting and other things.
It's just a love, and it started very odd moment. I remember I was studying for my master's degree, and I had got a new edition of this Alice in Wonderland. And the new edition said that it is set in a larger, more comfortable type. So I was talking to my friend. I said, I like this book, Alice in Wonderland, and now it's so much easier. So he said, but you already have one copy. So I said, yeah, but they say that, this is designed and its type is larger and so on. So then he asked me a very simple question. He asked me, how large is large? What do they mean when they say it is larger font size? I had no clue what is font size and so on. So that set me thinking. I said, yeah, so how large is large really? So then I started digging into it. And it was a very fascinating thing. That was one thing. The second thing is, by formal profession, I am a mycologist. That is somebody who studies fungi, and mostly microscopic fungi. And there are very small distinctions that we make in identifying a fungus. So it's like, whether some fungus has cross bars or vertical bars, then it becomes a different type. So I found the same thing with fonts. If the loop of the P is closed or open, then it's a different font, and so on. So that somehow got me into this line. And again, another accident was that for 3 or 4 years when I was in research, I was posted at a very small place. It was a campus placement in a very remote place. We didn't have electricity most of the time. Even if you run out of matchbox, you won't get a matchbox. But our director of the station Had some interest in editing and publishing, his own personal interest. So our institute, though it was a agriculture research institute, we had a good collection of books on editing and designing and publishing, and we had a lot of time on our hands. So I made good use of that, and that somehow got me interested. And then later on, I found it fascinating. In fact, one thing I remember, I published an article about how Indian railway timetable could be redesigned. So I took an example of trains between Mumbai and Pune and showed how it could be totally redesigned. And I published in a Marathi newspaper.
Okay.
And I was flooded with letters. I received at least 50 letters from users saying that, your design is so good and it's so easy to consult. I mean, this was before IRCTC and website and so on. Now it's not such a big deal. But that got me interested into design and typesetting. So,
no, I think even though the times have changed, and then you have a lot of options to choose your fonts, and then a variety of fonts available, but still understanding the combinations and picking the right combination of fonts in itself is a great matter of taste.
Yeah, it's a matter of taste, but it's also a matter of application, because you can't. In fact, when I teach, because one of the in the training programs I conduct, there's one topic on document design. So I say that, look, you can't simply say that I'm using this font because I like it. I mean, fine, that's the point, but it can't be the only criterion. There are so many other things. So, for instance, the symbols that you would require for your text, whether that font really has those symbols, or the symbols are going to be borrowed from some other font, which is not a good idea. Or, for instance, do you have footnotes? In that case, it should work well in smaller size. Not all fonts do that. Some fonts work well only if they are in comfortable size. So there are other considerations also that you need to take into account.
So when I said that it's a matter of taste, it is not about the personal preference, more about understanding which ones to use.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
But talking about that, LaTeX is completely altogether. A different platform which is known more for its font and the display.
Yeah, LaTeX, I mean, not that I'm very familiar with it, but I know that it gives you absolute control over positioning of every single element on a page. It gives you control, but after all, you are operating it. In fact, I remember in Terry, we had once a long tussle, and that was Terry at that time used WordPerfect. I mean, it was before Windows 3. And then at some point, then we started whether we should go in for Microsoft Word or we should continue with WordPerfect. And now, of course, this was a choice mainly by our IT team. And IT team was all for WordPerfect. I was from publishing side. I said you should go in for Word because it's far more user friendly. So that time I remember I was telling Dr. Pachauri, I said, it's like this, you are cooking a dish and you are consulting not the chefs, but the equipments of kitchen equipment. It's like that. So LaTeX is a powerful tool, but after all, to use it well, you need to know your purpose, you need to know your fonts, you need to know how to place them, spacing, line spacing, word spacing, and so on. LaTeX is only a tool.
I think that's why LaTeX has not found a widespread application like Word. It's still in the hands of few people who understand tech well.
Yeah, the esoteric. And it's a very steep learning curve.
It's more like a cult for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the correct word. It's a cult. But Scribus also is a very good page layout software, and it's open source. It's
Scribus.
Not as abstruse as LaTeX, and it gives you all the controls that you need. So Scribus, it's well worth investing into Scribus. Investing in the sense, investing your time.
Scribus.
Yeah. Scribus, yeah.
Yeah, I think someone mentions that LaTeX is more useful in mathematical fields. That's true.
Yeah. Because you require absolute control, especially complicated equations.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
I found equally good number of applications in physics and chemistry also. Because,
everywhere there are formulae and equations and complicated diagrams. You require. I mean, LaTeX does the job much better. Yeah.
Surit just shared that, when you talked about, Sujata Kesavan, he mentioned that she's also the person who, or he's also the person who designed the cover for Shadow Lines by Amitabh Koshab.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I just looked up and
Acha.
the interesting things that happen parallelly on the chat box.
Okay. Yes. I see. Yes.
So going back to the training part of,
Okay.
so what do you think are the characteristics of a good learner? More from a copy editing perspective, what do you want to see in a learner, copy editor?
One, as I said, you should have the urge to learn. You should have the urge to do better. I mean, okay, you are copy editing, your customers are happy with you, you are getting money. So, but you can't rest on your laurels. I mean, you can, it's just a matter of what you want to do. But if you want to continually better yourself, so that urge to learn, the urge to do a better job, I would say is one requirement. The other requirement, again, as I said, because it's a solitary business, and while attending a training program might be more fun, you interact and you just attend for 1 hour or 1 day or whatever, and then you go back. Whereas learning the skills of copy editing, I would say one of the best ways to become a copy editor is to look at the manuscript that has been copy edited by somebody else, maybe somebody who's a better copy editor. So that opens your eyes to the kind of changes that are made, and where changes are made, where changes are not made, and so on. That really opens your eyes. And as I mentioned to you when we exchanged this, I was very lucky because I had a chance to undergo a very intensive training program for 4 months at International Rice Research Institute. And one of the editors there, so I asked him, can I take a look at some of the things that you have edited? So he was very happy to share. And those days it was just hard copy. So when I started looking through the changes he had made, and that really opened my eyes. I said, see, that means you really need to work so hard and look at every aspect of the manuscript, and you need to be bold. You need to make, if it's required, you really need to make a lot of changes. So that was a good training opportunity. Even at Terry, I remember when newcomers would join our department, would say that, okay, here, because that time it was still a hard copy. So we will mark on a hard copy, and then it will be made up into pages. So then we will assign this job that here's a marked up manuscript and here's the next version. So you compare the two. So that was also a good training, because then the trainee could see the changes that were essential, the changes that were made to the manuscript, and so on. But again, it's a very boring business. But if you really want to do this, that's what you must be prepared for. But that is a good aspect of training, that you see, you work your way through track changes and compare your editing with somebody else's editing.
In fact, there's another related question that, when you training academicians, research papers and editing, have you edited or trained scientists to write articles for the mainstream media? Because science writing and the mainstream media itself is a completely different.
Absolutely. So I have never ventured into that. But I know one person, one KP Madhu. In fact, he regularly conducts a training program for scientists to teach them how to write for the mass media.
Masses.
So it's more of science communication. So Current Science Association in Bangalore used to conduct these very intensive 1-week training programs. Unfortunately, it's the COVID situation that put a stop to it. But he does that. And essentially, although there is only a 1 week of actual training program where people meet, it is preceded and followed by a lot of interaction offline. So scientists are encouraged to submit their writing, and so it's a group of, let's say, 10 or 12 participants. Then they comment on each other's writing and so on. But I have never ventured to do that.
Okay.
I'm more comfortable copy editing research papers rather than training scientists how to write for the masses. It requires a very different mentality,
different outlook and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely different range of skills.
So how has this COVID affected your training? Have you completely moved to online, or were you online already?
No, I was not online earlier.
Okay.
So in a way, it's done a good. It's been beneficial to me because I get more opportunities to conduct this training program. So I earn a little more. I also don't waste time in traveling.
Okay.
Yeah, but at the same time, what I miss is this change of scene.
Mm.
Because there's always a good thing that you are away from your desk, you travel somewhere, you get to meet people and so on. And in passing, I would mention, because I'm interested in plants,
Mm.
and many of the training programs were at agriculture research institutes, so that was a good opportunity for me to get some plants, some grafts, some seeds and so on. So that is all lost because of the webinar. But overall, I would say COVID has been a good thing for me, because I can, sitting at home, I can conduct training programs. I don't have to travel and so on.
So being sitting at home and doing the training or being editing, you were somewhere else. You said, I'm quoting, with to the question, what are your dislikes with respect to editing? You said, I hate having to rework copy edited matter when authors make large scale changes to their so-called final versions. I dislike seeing clarification from authors about missing figures and tables. Most importantly, this is the most important point. I'm adding that.
Okay.
I'm annoyed at being interrupted by telephone calls, reminding me of my deadlines from those who have defaulted on theirs. Yes.
Yeah, it really drives me crazy. I mean, and that's why I virtually all my work I do it through email. I said, please don't call me. You are not required to call me. I am not required to call you. You give me your manuscript. I'll edit it, send it back to you. End of the story.
So probably your desk at Terry and your desk at home, Jyotirmay and I wanted to see how serious editing.
Oh, it's
How does it look like? How intensive your editing is?
Oh, in fact, I always maintain that a good copywriter has OCD. Absolutely, this is a great requirement. And I was telling my mentor, Ian Montagnis, who was, I mentioned this course in the Philippines. So it was led by Ian Montagnis, who was at that time editor-in-chief of University of Toronto Press.
Mm-hmm.
But we have kept in touch, although this was back in 87. We kept in touch a couple of years ago. I even visited him. So I told him that, you know what, I'm lucky because I've gone into copy editing. So where OCD works really well, there's an outlet for my OCD. So I don't trouble others for my OCD, because all that finds, I channelize that into copy editing. So I would say, yes.
Could it be the converse? People who have OCD become better copy editors. Could it be?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm saying it's a very, it's a close link.
Closely linked.
Yes, yes. Typographers are another breed. They have to be OCD. Otherwise, I remember I was stunned by this. Eric Spiekermann, he is one of the very well-known type designers. DIN font, Meta, ITC Officina are his fonts. And it so happened that, we had a bank of computer monitors, and each one of us was working on a manuscript. And Eric was just going around.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at the font on my screen and said, that's a fake. I mean,
It's fake.
It was just mind-boggling. I said, even if you have to identify a font, you will enlarge it, as much as possible. You will study all these little details. And here's this guy who's just casually strolling by, looking at a screen and saying that it's a fake. I mean, imagine the level of detail that must have gone into that observation. It was just stunning.
I think one of our editors edited a quote printed on her boss's T-shirt.
What is that?
No, I think that happens very, very often when somebody becomes an editor. And the newspapers, whenever we read, we look for errors in newspapers. Especially, we were elated when we find an error in the Hindu earlier.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that used to be quite. But no, in fact, I will.
That give a folder of opportunities for you to find. Newspapers like that
it's an occupational disease, I would say, occupational hazard, to point out errors in other people's. You should refrain from that as far as possible. In fact, I remember once we had gone to a restaurant,
Mhm.
So with family, my mother was there, my wife was there. So we all seated ourselves and we were looking at the menu. And after about 5 minutes, my wife nudged me, said, "Are we not going to order?" And then I realized, because all I was
You
trying to
complete
do
the
to
editing process.
identify the font that the menu had used. So yeah, it tends to get kind of obsessive. I agree with
Yeah.
that.
I am reminded of an episode from Young Sheldon. If any of you, not Young Sheldon, Big Bang Theory. If any of you are watching Big Bang,
What's that?
Big Bang Theory is a serial about four scientists, the life of four scientists.
Mhm.
Just casual, but that the protagonist Sheldon is so obsessed with everything.
Hmm.
When he goes to the restaurant, he edits everything and then he orders.
See,
So that's a kind of mentality.
yeah. In fact, I remember a cartoon. There's a cartoon that somebody showing a poster, and it's a design studio, and the design director is, commenting, "Oh, what a lovely color combination, beautiful positioning of letter."
Mm.
And what it actually says, "There's a bomb in this room."
The message is lost, but the presentation has caught the
Yes. Yeah.
attention. Yes, yes. So there are a few other questions from our
Yeah, sure.
guests.
Yes.
So I think so. Surit asked if you had to write a copy editing brief, what would it look like? Can you share an example, which you already did? But
Yeah, in fact, what I have done is I shared a copy editing brief that we used to use, which tells you what levels of copy editing is required. And in fact, I've shared with Murugraj, and you're happy. You're most welcome to share it with.
yeah, I'll do that. I'll share with all the
Yeah.
participants. So, so somebody, I think it's Mr. Jayanthan who said, I have heard editors telling editing is a thankless job. And what is your take on that? And
Yeah, I agree with him totally, because I'm sure indexing is no different. That you don't get thanks. In fact, I compare it often to job of window cleaner.
okay.
If the window is cleaned very well, spotless,
Mm.
nobody will realize the job has been done. But if there is a smallest spot, you will be hauled for it. So that is, I mean, unless you find pleasure or joy in your own work, don't venture into copy editing. It is not going to get you, laurels and publicity and so on. No, it is a thankless job, but you do it because you like it.
And also, and on similar lines, Priya asked, do your parents understand the importance of the work that you do? Maybe for all of us, family members understand what kind of value that we are getting.
Well, one is that, as mentioned, they are thankful that all my OCD is channelized into my work, so they are not hassled by it. I don't insist that you must fold your clothes just so and so on. My parents, in fact, I would say that a lot of whatever success I have made of my job, I my parents are partly responsible, and it just so happened that both of them are into languages.
Mhm.
My mother was she has a master's degree in English, and she used to be a lecturer in English.
Mhm.
And my father was a professor of Sanskrit, so language was something that was always cherished at home.
Mm.
So that gave a good impetus
So
to my work.
oh, I'm sorry.
And but my daughter, I mean, after now she's grown up, but earlier I remember that she would come and naturally, as she wanted my time. So after some years, she figured out she would look at the status bar and she will look at the word count, and then that will give her some idea whether how long I'm going to be away.
Yeah, I think that's true. So many of I mean one problem with becoming an or being an editor in India is it's not a one common complaint is that it is not a well-paying job. So how do you find this? No, for you, whether editing or training has been a well-paying job, are you happy about that?
Um,
Never thought should have
well,
remained a scientist.
no, I would say that yes, it's true. It is not really a paying job, but it also depends so much on, your marketing skills, maybe your business acumen, and again, how much money you need. Now, it just so happens that I'm in a comparatively fortunate position that most of my life is behind me. I mean, of course, I have responsibilities. I don't get a pension from Terry, or if I do, that's a pittance. So I still need to earn my living, and I do it by copy editing, and it has sustained me all these years. But by and large, yes, it is true that it is not particularly paying business, but that is because people do not know the worth of our services. So so long as we raise awareness of the value that we add, because market is, I would say, immense. I mean, in my own field, that is, if you take simply the scientific and technical editing, India has, I probably next to China, the largest personnel working in research. So, and all of them really do need copy editing. And because especially academics, it is now increasingly important for them to publish, and not just publish, but publish in high impact factor journals. So there is a lot of scope. So that is one. And secondly, the outsourcing part. In fact, I remember writing an article. I had sent it to Vivek. I don't know whether he would share it with others. I had published a small article in European Science Editing about native and non-native copy editors. So I made this point that if you take copy editing, of course, language is a part of it. But there are so many other things that copy editors do, which has nothing to do with the proficiency in language. It is to do with your concentration. It is to do with your attention to detail. And in all this, there is no reason why would be inferior to those whose first language is English. And I remember Joan Marsh, that time she was president of EASE, European Association of Science Editors. In fact, she emailed me saying that I have circulated your article, because she was heading Wiley then amongst our colleagues. So, we really, there's no reason why we should consider ourselves in any way inferior because English is not our first language. I mean, because there are so many other skills that we bring to this job. So it's maybe not as well paying now, but I think it's only a matter of time. And if you persist, and if you go out, get and convince others of our value. In fact, I think that is the crux, because I'm no businessman. But I would say that, and it has just worked out well for me, because when I conduct the training programs, in a way, I'm marketing my services. Yeah, but so long as you convince others that you are offering them good value for money, they will be willing to pay more. And especially, as I said, for scientists, getting an article published in good journals is a very high stake business. So you should pitch for that.
That's true. Now, I was talking to an SEO professional sometime back for my website. And he said SEO is only one part. And of course, optimization is a lot of things. But his advice was more about what happens when people come to you after seeing your page on Google, or so the marketing part, that is also equally important. People talk about SEO and other things a lot, but fail to market themselves well when business come in actually. I think that's a very good perspective. You need to.
Yeah, you really need to market well. You need to have a business sense, because I have zero business sense. In fact, I made a serious mistake when I started out as freelance. Say, I used to get, anyone now I get work from an agency, and they would pay me a certain rate. So when somebody approached me for the first time, not through the agency, but directly as an author, that, will you copy it and how much will you charge? So it was stupid on my part. So I simply thought to myself, anyway, I'm getting this much from agency. So long as I get the same rate, that should be fine. Without even realizing that, after all, when agency was paying me, it was keeping its own cut. And it was charging the authors much more. Yeah, but I simply didn't realize that. And that means that I started at a fairly low rate, and it's not very easy to raise your rates.
I think this is true for many of us editors who started out as freelancing, because it's difficult to realize which is a realistic fees.
Yeah, you can't really say which is In fact, that's why I was astounded initially when Surit quoted a very high rate. But then, of course, I realized the amount of work he's doing to the manuscript. And I said,
Yeah.
you keep your work and you keep your money. I don't want to spend so much time polishing a manuscript. So I'm
That's
happy.
also the reason it becomes difficult to have a universal rate. I mean, there will always
Yeah, absolutely.
and
You can't
when
have a universal
outliers
rate.
cannot be measured on the universal rate.
Yes, that's true.
And in fact, it's 5. There are some questions also. Would you prefer to take them via?
Yeah, sure. I'm fine.
Okay,
Please.
great. Thank you. Because I was wondering if your watch tells you to stand up and walk away.
No. It's fine. No
Okay.
problem.
Thank you very much. So, could you please throw some light on the? Okay. So the agency that you just referred, is there any way to approach agencies, or are these agencies different from publishing companies?
Yeah, they are different from publishing. They are not publishers. Essentially, they are aggregators.
Okay.
So they act as a go-between authors and copy-editors.
Okay. So this is more like Cactus or Simpson.
Yes, exactly like that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple more questions.
Mhm.
So how have you, especially as a freelancer, you would have seen this. You had the need to improve productivity over a period of time. Did you consciously do anything to improve the productivity at any point of time?
No, in fact, I would say I'm not particularly productive. And I remember when I was working in Terry, that was a constant tussle between, that was Dr. Pachori's point of criticism for me always. He said, no, you have to be more productive. You are too slow in working. Okay, your work is good, but it's too slow. And that was always a never-winning, never-ending battle. Only that's why I breathed a sigh of relief when I came out of Terry and I started working freelance. Even now, I dream many times that the deadline is approaching and I'm running behind schedule and so on. It was nightmares. So I'm not particularly productive. I would say, as a rule of thumb, if I do about 3,500-4,000 words a day, I would say I'm fine. I can't really do more than that. So I'm not really qualified to say how one can be more productive, other than saying that you should avoid cell phones.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great the worst distractor ever.
Absolutely, yes.
So one more question. So, what kind of negative feedback have you encountered?
Only once I have, where it was pointed out that my editing was not that of a native speaker of English. But in all these years, only once this has happened. But when I persisted and I would like to know in what way it was, there was no response. But apart from that, the other negative feedback mostly has been about time. Not that I have ever defaulted on deadlines. Never. If I commit to a deadline, I have always kept it. But there is always this negative point. No, you take too long. So that's one negative aspect I have. Negative feedback I have received, and probably I continue to receive. But it's too late to change now.
Yeah. And Vivek mentioned that the article that you shared with him, he has shared it already in the Facebook.
Okay. Great. Yeah, since I'm never on Facebook, there's no way I would get to know, but I'm glad that he has done it. That was the whole purpose of...
I think some of us editors try to move in and out of Facebook every sometime.
I have a Facebook account, but I must be 2 or 3 years since I last looked at it. So.
Great. All right. Those are the questions that I had, and it was wonderful talking to you as always.
Oh, it was very enjoyable. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And see you soon in more number of trainings for ICF. That's one request.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's something I like doing.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to do it for ICF.
And we also look forward to a course on typography and a copy editing mentoring course from you.
Oh, great.
A lot pipeline for you. Communicating in style, second
sure.
typography course, and more requests coming in. So
Yeah,
It's
please
nice.
feel free. I mean, I would be happy to be a part of this. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thanks so much. Then.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hope I have not been too preachy, but well, okay. You don't
You're
get a chance often. So.
always nice talking to you.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Murugaraj, and thanks, Jatian, for a very enriching and interesting conversation. And Murugaraj has given long list of things that like we will look forward to in the future. And have a nice day, everyone. See you tomorrow at 11 for our Sunday webinar.
Oh, yes. Okay.